Shabbat Shalom. I want to share with you a story that took place a couple of weeks ago when I was in Baltimore for a conservative movement convening. Rabbis, cantors, synagogue presidents, and lay people who were there to celebrate the conservative movement. And as I was leaving the hotel, I exited. There were no taxis available, but then I was directed towards some of the cars available for hire and drivers that were there. So, gentleman sits out of the car, African-American man, without saying anything, just picks up my bag, puts it in the back. I step in the car. And as we start on our journey, he soon started talking with me, and I noticed a very thick African accent. So I wondered what brought him to America. What story did he have of oppression? And then as we began talking, he asked me, what was that taking place at the hotel? Was it Jewish people? And I said, yes. And I explained what the convening was about. And he said, I grew up in Israel. And my jaw just opened up. And I said, really? He says, yeah, from the age of 6, my family moved there and I grew up. And I was imagining when I was in Israel years ago, there were African immigrants who left Africa who were oppressed and who were starving and looking for a better life. And I knew, and I'd seen those students in schools, and there was actually some challenge because they weren't there legally. And then I asked, what brought you to Israel? And he said, my father was an engineer and he wanted to work in Israel. He had a great opportunity, and he mentioned the company they worked for. And so we moved to Israel quite young, and he told us that we were going to be part of this great country. And we became part of that country. He learned Hebrew. We began, by the way, conversing in Hebrew. And once he spoke Hebrew, it was with an Israeli accent. And he shared with me how he served in the IDF, in the Israeli army. He eventually met a woman, an Israeli, and married her. And came to the United States eventually, but like many Israelis do, to seek a different path potentially. And when I asked him about his thoughts about Israel, they were only positive reflections, a country where he felt embraced. It was an amazing experience learning from him about perceptions of what it was like as a man of color growing up in Israel. We talked about political issues, from the government to what it was like to be an African family growing up in Israel. Shared many things. It was only a 20-minute ride to the airport. I wished it was actually much longer. But we spoke in Hebrew. I felt he was my brother in that very short time, something that bound us together. And he had this great laugh. And when he exited the car, we shared together a final hug and said, we are truly brothers. It made me think that we have to be careful about not prejudging people. We have to be very careful about our conceptions, about being open to hear the stories of people and see people for their uniqueness. In the words of the famous Rabbi Hillel, Ohevet Habriot, we need to love all of God's creatures. That story still resonates with me. I can still hear his Israeli accented Hebrew. What a wonderful experience it was. I learned such a great deal from him. I hope you as well, on this Shabbat, learn about opening hearts and seeing people for who they are, not for what we think they are, to open our minds, open our hearts, to love all God's creatures. Shabbat Shalom.